Great. Well, welcome everyone who decided to join today's webinar. We're going to talk about teenagers, learn about teenagers and what happens in those important years, and then try to apply that knowledge to the topic of skin picking. My name is Dr. Sophia Wenzler. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and also the clinical lead here at SkinPick. SkinPick is an online therapy program that combines online sessions with support by therapists. And that's the program that is basically bringing this webinar to you. I want to encourage each and every one of you to stick around until the end because we're going to have a Q&A session where you can ask me anything you want. This presentation is going to be about 40 minutes, and then we're going to go into the Q&A section. Please don't raise your hands during the presentation or after. I'm not going to respond to raised hands, but you can feel free to write down any question in the Q&A section, and I'm going to get to as many as I can. All right, let's get right into it. So I'm going to dedicate quite a lot of time to explaining you about teenagers in general, because there's very few quick and easy tricks or like strategies that you can use them. It's really, like, in my opinion, a lot about understanding what's going on in a teenager's brain, which is very interesting. And where are they? What are they supposed to do? What is this age even for, those crazy years? So we're going to talk about brain development and developmental tasks, and then we're going to apply that knowledge to understand what teenagers really need and what we can do to support them, and obviously also specifically in terms of the skin picking. Then I'm going to conclude, and we're going to go into the Q&A session. All right, understanding teenagers. So when we think about teenagers, oftentimes ideas that come up are moodiness, weird group behaviors, puberty, awkwardness. Teenagers don't want to hear what I say. They have pimples, their bodies are developing, they sleep all the time, they have really intense emotions, they don't know what's good for them, they care a lot about their friends. Those are typical things that you hear, when you talk about teenagers. Obviously, there's also positive things, but I feel there's also a lot of negative connotation to this age. And to just kind of like complement that, I want you to take a few moments to think about your own time when you were teenagers, when you were 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. You can even close your eyes. We don't have cameras, so it doesn't matter. Try to remember this time, think about it as if you're going through a photo album. Think about the school you went to. Maybe you had dances. Think about your teachers, your friends. What kind of things did you do? Maybe you had a crush on someone. And think about your home situation when you were a teenager. Take a few moments to connect to that version of yourself, as I think it's helpful as we go through all the things that we're going to go through, to keep that in mind in addition to the teenager you might have at home. That is the reason, why you joined this webinar. So when I prepared, I also thought about a teenager. In this case, I had the pleasure of spending a week with my niece and nephew not so long ago. A week. I usually don't see them. We don't live in the same country. And so quite a while went by without me seeing them. And all of a sudden now I met them and they're super teenagey. And it was very interesting. And I want to describe one situation with my 14-year-old nephew to you that puzzled me very much. And that kind of I want to explain to you through the things that we're going to learn. So now I'm going to tell you about the situation, how it puzzled me. And then after, we're going to go through brain development and developmental tasks. I'm going to present to you my ideas of what explains this behavior. So my daughter is actually 15 months old. And this was the first time that my nephew would meet her. And he's 14-year-old, like a really good guy, like a good boy. That sounds weird. Very smart, plays basketball. And then he sees my 15-month-old daughter and he's like, oh my God, I'm scared of babies, and leaves the room. And for the whole week, he kind of didn't make any advances and always pretended that he's scared of babies, which they're not really scary. So I was like, what's going on with him? And I'm going to explain it to you after we go through, after we're a little bit smarter, hopefully, through the next slides. So there's something really interesting about brain development in teenagers, that this knowledge is actually quite new. Only in the last 15, 20 minutes, 20 years, did we become smarter about brain development in teenagers. Only until recently did we think that brain development is pretty much done at that age, but it's not at all. It actually goes on until our mid to late 20s. Okay, and what really marks the teenage years is the development of two different brain areas: the prefrontal cortex, that is underdeveloped during those years, and the limbic system, that is oversensitive, and the way that those two kind of interact with each other. And that's what I want to explain to you now. So the prefrontal cortex, I know that's a scary word. The cortex in general is kind of the outer layer of the brain. It's very, very well developed in humans. And the prefrontal cortex is like literally this part of your brain. Only mammals have a prefrontal cortex, and a turtle or an octopus, for example, octopus would not have one. And it's very, very big in humans. It's basically one of the things that sets us apart from other mammals, and it's responsible for high-level cognitive functions. So decision-making, planning ahead, planning about what you're going to do now and how that's going to affect, your life in a week or in a year. Predicting consequences of behavior, inhibiting unwanted or inappropriate behavior, understanding other people, self-awareness, and focusing one's attention. So you basically have to assume that all of those things are, that the prefrontal cortex is not yet developed. It's like one of the areas that takes the longest to develop, while other areas are quite mature already in teenagers. This area is very underdeveloped. So all of those things that I just went through are difficult for teenagers, not because they're not putting an effort in, but because their brain is not developed enough to think about the future, to always evaluate the consequences of their behaviors, right? And at the same time, the limbic system is oversensitive. So the limbic system is different. It's not in the outer layer of the brain. It's very, very deep in there, and it's a much more instinctive survival kind of area of the brain that we share with a lot of different animals. There's some brain areas, like parts of the limbic system, for example, the amygdala that you maybe heard, it's very involved in the fight-flight response that you find in almost all animals. And so the limbic system is responsible to create behaviors that secure survival, for example, a fear response, or rewarding feelings when we go out into the world, when we seek food or seek to reproduce, that's rewarded, and that feeling also comes from the limbic system. And so specifically what I want to remember is not only that, emotional responses might be oversensitive during the teenage years, but also this kind of rewarding feeling when you take a risk, when you do something crazy, when you try something new. That's also something that the limbic system is responsible for. And usually what happens in like adults whose brain is developed to full potential is that the prefrontal cortex will regulate the limbic system, and they will go hand in hand. But in the teenage years, we basically have a mismatch in the timing of the development. The prefrontal cortex is not yet strong enough to kind of control or direct the instincts of the limbic system. So that means if we consider again that the prefrontal cortex keeps developing well into the 20s, that there's a whole decade during which we have imbalances in emotional and contemplative thinking, right? And you might think, well, that sounds like a recipe for a disaster. Why is that so? And there are actual reasons, because in the end, a lot of the things about us, about our biology, about our inner wiring have a reason. You know, they developed over thousands of years to make us fit for survival. And so also this mismatch has a reason. And if you think about what the teenagers ages are there for, you know, for in terms of like development, then it makes more sense. So I'm going to talk about developmental tasks. Every age has, you know, developmental tasks, kind of challenges that we have to, what do you do with a challenge? Overcome? No, challenges that you have to cope with, for lack of better words. For example, a baby has the developmental task of being able to drink milk and to cry for help if they're anxious. And teenagers have developmental tasks as well. First of all, they have to seek independence. That's very scary for parents because they kind of seek more and more distance from their parents. Just like a toddler, for example, would go out into the playground, always looking back for, you know, that the parents are there, but they're doing their own steps, you know, going to the slide alone. That's, you know, steps towards independence. And that's what also happens during the teenage years. And the teen may refuse to go, you know, to family activities, to the movies. They want to demonstrate that they have their own will and their own ideas. They might want to have more privacy. And that's scary for parents because they're also, you know, less in control and know that's what's going on. But also remember that this is also scary for the teenager to do those things. And that's why it's actually to their advantage that the limbic system is so oversensitive, because they have to take risks, right? So the fact that they're more impulsive, that they gain great reward in like risky behaviors, and to like following their instincts and their ideas and trying new things out, and even like being kind of even seeing how that, you know, peers might, you know, find that cool. That's something that rewards this kind of behavior that we want to see in teenagers. If they were like us adults, thinking a million steps ahead all the time, they wouldn't seek independence. They would be too scared. They would be too scared of the consequences. So it's actually good, you know, in that case. Obviously, they still need guidance by their parents, because sometimes those risky behaviors are really, really risky. But the fact that they gain independence and they are able to take risks is actually to their advantage developmentally. The next developmental task is building peer relations, because the teenage years are actually, you know, preparation for leaving the house. And teenagers have to be able to find groups and friends outside, you know, their family, to not be lonely when they move out, which makes sense. But their prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. So their socially awareness, or things like being able to take another person's perspective, is not as developed yet. So that's actually something they're just learning. They're learning how to be part of a group, how to connect, to build deep, you know, intimate relationships with friends, or even already a partner. And as with a lot of new skills, that is also sometimes exaggerated, right? So they learn this new skill, forming groups, and then they exaggerate it. Like the group has really clear rules, and you have to follow all of those rules. In order to fit in, you have to wear the right clothes, you have to know the right words, the right slang. And if you don't, then that's really embarrassing, and you might, you know, run risk to be excluded from the group. The same goes for grooming behaviors. You know, if you have to pluck your eyebrows or cover up your skin with makeup in order to fit in with the group, then that's where the grooming behaviors start. And grooming behaviors, kind of taking that interest into what your skin and hair looks like, is also a trigger for skin picking disorders. So it's during that, that's why a lot of the times the disorder can break out throughout the teenage years. Yeah, so it becomes, paramount to treat things like acne and take care of her skin, but it's really important that it doesn't, go out of hand, because then we're getting into dangerous territory. Later on, obviously, that new skill can be used with more flexibility, and teenagers can understand that they can be part of a group, but they can also be different and understand each other. But yeah, in the early teenage years, it's a new skill, and it's actually very important that friends all of a sudden become that important, and that you kind of do everything to gain the approval of your friends, even if it makes no sense, and even if it has negative consequences. The last developmental task is building your own identity. So during that, when you're a little child, you kind of just take over a lot of the ideals and morals and identity of your parents, and then at some point you notice, well, that's not how it's supposed to be, but like how it has to be. Maybe some of you also remember this time when you're all of a sudden at a friend's house and you're like, oh, they talk about different stuff here, like things work differently, like their rituals are different. I always thought it was the same as at home in every other house. Oh, but apparently it isn't. So it's important for your child to go out into the world and to take risks and to get to learn new people and situations in order to kind of find their own identity. It's important to, seek some distance. Okay, so we learned a lot about what's going on in the teenage years. And now I want to kind of apply this knowledge in order to try to explain to you the behavior of my 14-year-old nephew a little bit more. So again, really nice boy, actually very smart. And then he behaves really weirdly and awkwardly around my 15-month-old baby daughter. So, and by the way, also that was, oopsie, kind of frustrating for me. Teenagers can be frustrating sometimes, because I'm like, I don't get, like, when someone sees my baby daughter and kind of doesn't fall in love with her. I don't get it, which is again my developmental task in becoming a mom. But yeah, just so you know, I wasn't only laughing about it, I was also frustrated. But anyways, so the first thing that I realized is that my 14-year-old nephew has no template of what to do when around a baby. They don't know. Their prefrontal cortex is also not developed enough to understand what is expected of me right now in the eyes of other people. So that's scary for them. They're also oversensitive in terms of like their emotional reactions. So they're like, oh my God, I don't know. Then they get anxious, and that anxiety is felt really intensely. Like, what are you supposed to do when you're around a baby? And because they don't know what they're supposed to do, and in this case, at least, and he's anxious and awkward, he engaged in a weird, reaction that eventually made him leave the situation, because when you're anxious, the fight or flight kind of response is evoked. So he invented some kind of weird or spontaneous idea of like, I'm afraid of the baby. What he's actually afraid of is a social situation that he doesn't know how to navigate. And then he giggled nervously and left the room. Also, the prefrontal cortex is not developed yet, so he's not able to understand my perspective. He loves me, like we have a good relationship, but he doesn't understand that this is disappointing for me, right? That my nephew will not, go to her and tell her that she's the best baby ever. He doesn't understand that, so he doesn't know how to act the part to kind of in that situation make me happy. And then also, he is not able to think long term yet. He doesn't understand, oh, it's now part of our family. At some point, I might want to have a relationship with her because I'm going to see her at least, on holidays and stuff like that. He doesn't think that far ahead. He's in the situation now and he's anxious, so he's reacting intuitively and impulsively. Yeah, so those are kind of like my takeaways from that situation. And eventually, I also understood like he's not meant to be into babies. He's meant to seek his own identity, the approval of his peers, and to gain his own independence. I'm supposed to be into babies. That's my developmental test. It's not his. So yeah, kind of made me accept his reaction much more. And I think that's the whole point, that once you understand what's going on, and like maybe the behavior of a teenager might frustrate you or might puzzle you, and then if you understand it better, you can react much more understandingly, or in a much more understanding way and a much more helpful way. That's why I think it's so important. And also remember, this is a great opportunity. There's a lot of change going on. The brain is extremely adaptable and able to learn. So it's a fantastic opportunity for development and creativity. Things like novelty seeking, risk taking, and a shift towards interacting with peers are behaviors that are deeply rooted in biology and found eventually in all social mammals. So we really want to encourage them to actually go after those developmental tests and do those things. And eventually, evolutionarily, if you really break it down, it also comes from a from a direction where we want, people to go out in the world in order to diminish the likelihood of inbreeding and create a healthier genetic population. That's where it all comes from. So, like, it all made sense once, and it still makes sense now, kind of. And another thought that came up for me just while I was preparing those slides was that maybe also the fact that sometimes it's frustrating and sometimes, there's more fights at home and more confrontation. Maybe that's also evolutionarily something that's supposed to help the parents to let go and to kind of accept that there's, a separation, that there's that the child is spreading their wings to make it easier. But that's just a thought. There's no research to prove that. Okay, so what are we going to do with that knowledge? So again, I want to go back to those two brain areas and the way that the characteristics of those brain areas for those years. So we have the limbic system, again, that is kind of oversensitive. So we have to focus on emotion regulation skills. We have to help teenagers to kind of navigate the storm that the teenage years feel like sometimes, because eventually skin picking is, in many cases, an emotion regulation strategy. So it's very important to find healthy ways to cope with emotions, because if the default is and stays skin picking, then that connection, that neural connection between emotion regulation and skin picking will get stronger and stronger. So we have to implement healthier emotion regulation strategies. And I do know that when I say emotion regulation strategies, a lot of you will think about deep breathing, like techniques, actual techniques that you can do, 5-minute exercises in order to calm you down in an emotional situation. And that's helpful and important. But for me, emotion regulation goes much deeper. Okay, specifically when your child is still at home. A lot of the emotion regulation can actually happen in this connection between you and your child. I have this picture here of a big ship and like a small paper ship, because that's how I see it sometimes. You as a parent are the mother or the father ship, and your little ship is not here with you in your arms anymore, right? They're out in the sea, but they're still connected to you. And through that connection, they can gain a lot of things. So it's very important in those years that although you want to make the line longer and longer, you still want to stay connected. You want to make offers for connection where you can, and you have to kind of deal with the fact that some of those offers are going to be rejected. And another way to stay connected is to be curious, to ask questions. There's nothing, I don't want to overgeneralize, but one thing that a lot of teenagers don't like is when people just assume that they understand them. Even if you feel you understand them, it's better to ask questions, to be curious, to assume that maybe there's something you don't understand. And also to stay, authentic, to stay the same mother or fathership they know, to not, fake it, share about yourself. That is a very connective, like, meet your teenager on eye level when you talk to them. Tell them if you don't understand them, wow, like I think I understood 50% of what you just said, but it's so important to me to understand you. Can you maybe explain more? Even if they're doing something that frustrates you. Wow, I'm so mad at you right now because you came home after curfew. We need to work on that. I cannot be up worrying about you at 12 p.m. What happened? What was going on, right? How can we do it better next time? Another important part in this kind of being your child's anchor during that storm, being their safe base, is providing stability. You stay yourself even if your child is changing. It's okay that they're changing. You still can stay connected, but you're going to be the same. I mean, not the same, but you're going to, stay stable. That also requires obviously a lot of self-regulation. When they're in their storm and they're in their intense emotions, you remain anchored to yourself. That requires self-regulation and self-care, but like we all know that is very important for parents. And the last, or maybe most important thing is validation. I mean, staying connected and being a stable base for your teenager is the very, very foundation. And then the way that you can help them regulate their emotions is to validate the emotion. Okay, not deep. I mean, breathing is fine, but they're in this storm and they don't know what's going on. They might even not have a name for what they're feeling. They think that they are exaggerating themselves. There is nothing more calming than to have someone else look at you, really be curious, understand you, and then tell you, wow, this makes sense. What you are feeling makes sense. I would feel the same. Nothing more calming, no breathing technique. So, and I talk about that a lot, but validation is just such a beautiful way to be connected to another person. It's important in relationships, it's important with your children, and it's important with your teenagers. So I just want to go back, and even maybe for some of you that have not been to a webinar with me yet, to the validation techniques. Okay, let's say your teenager comes home and they're saying, "Oh, school sucks. Why do I even have to go?" Which is a provocative thing because they're implying that they don't want to go to school. So you might, intuitively want to react with, wow, can you talk about anything else? Like, is there nothing you like about school? Or like, you have to go. I go to work, you go to school. Try working. That sucks even more. You have to go to school because you have to learn. Like, you might immediately get defensive, but that's not validation. Validation is to stop for a second and ask questions first and foremost. Just take what they said and add a question mark. Oh, you had a hard time at school today. You don't want to go to school anymore. Paraphrase, and most importantly, use nonverbal cues. When you really want to connect to your child or teenager, put your phone away, look at them, go on their level if they're sitting or if they're smaller than you, and make eye contact. Tell them that, like, I'm with you 100% now, and I want to know what's going on. And then there's several techniques of how to validate a feeling. You can kind of validate by showing your child that they're not alone. Make sense of the feeling based on yourself. I can understand. I also often didn't want to go to school when I was your age, I get it. Based on others, wow, like I also hear the other parents that their kids don't want to go to school right now. What's going on there? Or you can just make sense, not by comparing to other people or yourself, but by just making sense of the situation. Wow, it must be so hard to go to school when you feel like you have no friends in your class. You must feel lonely at times. And that's not an easy sentence to say for a parent, because like just putting that out there without immediately trying to jump in and help is painful, because who wants their child to be lonely? But if that's what they're experiencing, then immediately wanting to push it away, offer solutions, or like ignore it or cheer them up will not make them feel seen. Wow, it's super hard to do something, for example, school, when you feel like it doesn't interest you at all. When I have to go to work and I know I have a lot of boring meetings in a row, I sometimes have to work hard on motivating myself. And I always want to stress that validation doesn't mean to just accept something. It just means to understand and kind of communicate that it makes sense. So you can use validation also to offer support or an opportunity for change. Wow, I see that you have a hard time going to school because you're afraid someone will see the spot where you picked. How can I be here for you? I understand how hard that is, and that's why I want to support you, and that's why I want to think about with you about how we can change this situation. But I think you first have to have this kind of connection and connection and understanding, then do everything else. That's the whole point, because every other trick or technique or anything you want to do, if you want to, you know, motivate your child to seek therapeutic treatment or to try to work on the skin picking at home or whatever it is, you have to have the base first in the conversation and the communication. And that's why we need this validative, curious approach. That's why I put so much emphasis on it. So that's what we want to do in order to deal with those intense emotions, and in order to help with the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. Sounds weird. To help with the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is not as developed yet. So what I like to think about it in, it's like a construction site. Okay, it's a construction site. There's also rapid development going on. So you can help your child to build that construct this prefrontal cortex from the base in a solid and strong way, right? You can help shape it. Why do you help to shape it? Because this prefrontal cortex is basically a big part of what later on becomes your child's healthy adult. Okay, you're a healthy adult. What is the healthy adult? I hope I'm not too confusing here. So we all have different voices in our heads, right? A lot of people can connect to that concept that we have different voices in our head. We have critical voices that put us down. We have demanding voices that like ask a lot of us to push further and to try harder. And then we have the healthy adult. The healthy adult is the voice in our heads that thinks ahead, that finds solutions for problems, that can instinctively, empathetically understand what is going on in other people, that, you know, takes care of our own needs and takes our emotions seriously, that validates our own, you know, inner storm. And a lot of the abilities and skills of the healthy adult are based on the prefrontal cortex. And the healthy adult, this inner voice that later on is going to help your child to deal with challenges and to be happy and balanced in life, to large parts is our internalized messages that they heard when they were children and teenagers, which means to a large part, those are messages from you. They internalize the things that you tell them, and they internalize the things that you model to them, the way that you talk to yourself. So if you feel like, okay, my child doesn't have the tools to approach this problem, they're stuck, they don't know what to do, then think about what you want their healthy adult in their heads to tell to them, to say to them. And that's what you have to tell them. That's the message you want to bring across, either by talking to them or by modeling it to them. If you're a teenager, has a hard time dealing with challenges, then you talk about your own, then you have a challenge, then you fail at something, and you show them how you deal with it, and they're gonna internalize that. Okay, so this is a great opportunity and also a great responsibility. And that's why things like stop picking already. Why are you doing this? Those are messages that you should overthink, because that's not going to contribute to the healthy adult. That's going to turn into a demanding voice. The demanding and critical voices are also things that your child kind of, internalized at home and at school. So whenever you're in doubt of like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? Think about what you want your child to tell themselves in their heads. And that's where you want to get. And once you have that base and this kind of communication with your child, then you can go into more concrete ways of how to support them with the skin picking. Obviously, for any conversation you have with them about it, it's very important that you have to know about skin picking very well. You have to know what it is, what the symptoms are, why can I not stop? Why is it more than just a habit? Am I weird? Are there others? If your child or teenager has that question, then you have to know about it. To answer something like, you know what, out of 100 kids, there's probably about 60, we know from research, that have pulled their hair, picked their skin, or bit their nails before. So you're not alone. And even 4 out of those 100 might have the same problem as you, like where it became a real disorder. So just think about how many kids are at school and how many there might be. You might not know about it because they don't talk about it, but you're not alone. You can react in this way only if you have the knowledge. And if you want to learn more about skin picking disorder, then I want to encourage you to check out our other webinars. By the way, I also did a webinar on support recently where I also talked about some strategies that parents can use with children. Some of them apply very well also to teenagers, so check that out. And then very, very importantly, when you notice the picking, don't intervene immediately. Don't intervene. That's very difficult because it's hard to watch your child pick their skin, right? But don't intervene. You cannot make it go away by making them feel bad. It is just going to get worse. Don't become that critical voice in their heads that at some point they're just going to hear, oh, you did it again, you did it again. They're just going to start saying that to themselves if they're not already doing that. Don't tell them to stop. Don't force them to seek professional help, shame, scold, or embarrass them for the picking. You, first of all, just observe, okay? If your child is very cooperative, then you can do it together. And if not, you just observe them. You try to find out at which time of day, in which situations are they doing it? How much are they doing it? What are the objects that they're using? What are the triggers? Is it because they're in front of the mirror? Is it because they're just, bored with their phone on the couch? What kind of movements are they doing? Those are the things that you want to find out. And then once you have some, ideas or feel like you understand the knowledge, the situation, just like a detective, you can try to talk to them about it. Very gradually. Even start with a question, you know what I noticed recently, like, can I share with you, like, there's something I picked up on, but I'm not even sure it's true, like, correct me if I'm wrong. And if you have a stable base and a good communication with your teenager, then that's how you can kind of slowly get into it and maybe start also to like make this a joint project where you can observe and learn together and then think about solutions together. Because the prefrontal cortex is not as developed yet, we cannot expect from teenagers that even if you found a good strategy, that will help them. For example, if they have to do homework and they know, that they tend to pick during that time. So, they have to take breaks, or they have to like switch from sitting in front of the desk to sitting on the couch to sitting on the bed, mix it up. You cannot always expect them to understand, to anticipate that. You have to support them and help them because they cannot always, think ahead or think about consequences. So remind them, prepare with them. If they, go on a long drive, and remind them that they might want to take their gloves, or that they might want to take their fidget toy with them. Have the fidget toys spread all over the house. So whenever the temptation comes up, there's one that you can grab. Try to like help them, you know, develop those strategies of thinking ahead, and don't be frustrated if they forget. They literally can't. It's their brain. And then if it comes to the question whether to seek professional help, obviously you cannot treat, you know, skin picking for your child. That's a real condition that needs real, you know, professional help that we offer, for example, at Skin Pick. But if the question is that your teen really doesn't want to seek professional help, and you feel like you're always just, you know, trying to convince them, then there's like this kind of exercise that you can do, because the long-term thinking about consequences is so difficult. You can kind of say, okay, well, let's, you know, let's really think about it. Let's make a pro and con list, but make a pro and con list considering what are short-term and long-term consequences to help them make that differentiation. Okay, in the short term, it's good to avoid therapy. Like therapy has negative consequences. It's scary. It costs money. I'm not sure it helps. So in the short term, it's much easier to not go to therapy because I have more time. I stay safe. I don't have to talk about this like weird, embarrassing thing that I'm doing. And then switch to long term and help them to think about what will happen in half a year and what will happen in a year. And if your teenager thinks like, okay, well, you only want to convince me of going to therapy, right? Then you can even start with the disadvantages of therapy and even add some reasons, right? To that, to first of all make them understand that you see why it's difficult for them, to then go into the advantages of therapy and kind of elaborate on that. So this sounds maybe a little bit, I don't know, analytical or oversimplified, but this is actually something that I do a lot in therapy with teenagers. I work a lot with teenagers in therapy, and it can be really insightful, because for us, maybe sometimes it even seems like obvious, but for a teenager, it's not always that obvious. Okay. Wait, did I go over time that much? No, just a little bit. So let's conclude. Teenagers' brains are marked by a mismatch in development between the prefrontal cortex, their rational decision-making part of the brain, and the limbic system, which is oversensitive and kind of makes them more emotional and more prone to seeking reward by risk-taking. This mismatch leads to things like unpredictable behavior, risk-taking, emotional outbursts, but this mismatch also helps them tackle developmental tasks such as being part of a group, gaining independence, and building their own identity. During this scary, crazy time, they need you as an anchor, even if it sometimes doesn't seem like it. You have to stay their safe place where they can, you know, open up, feel like they're understood by you, a place where they feel like someone listens to them and makes sense of those emotions that they oftentimes think make no sense. And you can help them by observing, sharing, preparing, and thinking about long-term consequences together. Before we go into the Q&A section, I want to remind you of our free resources at SkinPick. Our monthly webinars you obviously know about. Also, in October, we're going to have BFRB month. So there's going to be extra events that I would be happy to see you at. We have online forums and blogs on skinpick.com, and we have Facebook groups. We're on Instagram and TikTok. And you can find all of our webinars and recordings of past webinars on our YouTube channel, SkinPick. Here is also a promo code in case you want to sign up for our therapy program at SkinPick, or the parent program. We have a parent program as well, where you as parents can, you know, go through the treatment of how to treat skin picking and kind of help your teenager or child with the guidance and help of one of her expert therapists. If either one is the case, you can use this promo code. Yeah, and that's it from me today. Do we have any questions? I think that's half a question, and it cuts off in the middle. I'm looking for therapy in Queens, New York, or near that area. My daughter is 25 years old, and she has a severe case of. Skin picking, maybe. Well, if your adult daughter is looking for therapy, then I want to recommend or program skin pick to her. She's old enough to do it by herself. She would go through online sessions on her own and be guided through that by an expert therapist. Yeah, I would recommend her to try out our program. Then there's another comment. Thank you. You're welcome. Hope you liked it. Any more questions that came up? Questions or thoughts during the webinar right now? Another comment, just need to learn how the limbic system plays a part in this. Yes, right? I think it's super interesting, the brain development and how it works in teenagers. Another thank you. How much is the therapy monthly? So with SkinPick, it's $260 for a 4-week period, which to some people sounds a lot at first, but it's actually much more affordable than one-on-one therapy, which lies around $600 a month, and you still get the communication with your therapist on a daily basis, not once a week, all the online sessions and the tools. And you get a $100 discount on your first subscription if you use the promo code. Suggestions for fidgets. Wow, there is such an abundance of fidgets. And what I always recommend is actually the webinar by one of our expert therapists, Laura Sandner. She wrote the big extensive list of fidgets, and she did a webinar for us specifically on that topic. You can find it on our YouTube channel, where she presents and shows you how to use all kinds of different fidgets, even one that she designed herself. So when we cover that topic of fidgets in therapy with my clients, I usually just make them watch this webinar because it saves us time, and it's really well made, and she knows about like a lot of different options on how to stimulate your senses through fidgets. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Such a great webinar, so professional, interesting, and well presented. Learned a lot and loved it. I'm happy to hear. Let's wait 1 or 2 more minutes if there are any more questions, and if not, I'm gonna close the meeting for today. Not surprising. Usually I don't even get to the end of the questions. So maybe I was so clear today. Anyways, I want to thank everyone who joined today's webinar. I'm going to close the Q&A section now, and I'm going to stop the screen share. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a nice rest of your day or evening. I hope to see you again for the upcoming webinars. Bye bye.